you broke.
Yeah. Someday I'll win one of those. Not today.
No, yeah, I know.
Not today.
So it's been like a month off, man.
Yeah.
What have we been doing? I mean, Easter came around and like we went deep undercover.
That's right. We too much to do before Easter. Lack of a desire to do anything after Easter.
No ambition after Easter.
And then
I was like, oh, Easter's over. Andrew, you preach.
That's right. And then other things happened, but we're back.
But we are. Yeah, I'm not going to say that phrase anymore.
I know,
People
I'm
are getting
sorry.
sick of it.
Yeah.
But it's true. We're back.
Yeah.
Yes. We're back, and things. So we're going to actually only talk about one thing today. So some articles refer to it as COVID anxiety. Other articles have, used the more clinical agoraphobia. I'm just going to call it coronaphobia.
Coronaphobia.
So coronaphobia. So I'm going to specifically address this for our context,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. And because I know we have a lot of listeners that don't live here in whacked out Marin County, but I'm going to specifically address it as if everybody lived here,
Yeah.
because then you can kind of take maybe some of what we're talking about and apply it to your own context later. So Marin County is like steaming towards 90% vaccination. Okay, so from a community perspective, that's everything we've been told about herd immunity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There are less than 100 active cases in the county. In fact, we had one day where we had like no new cases the other day, 2 days ago.
Wow.
So that's like 0.003 something of the population here in Marin County.
Yeah.
Our church in particular has an unusually high vaccination adherence, like as in 2 households have unvaccinated members.
Yeah.
And that comes from a survey that we sent out a while ago, and then just what's happened since the survey went out. And CDC starting to loosen things up.
Yeah.
They sent out some advisory stuff about a month ago about, hey, if you're vaccinated, you can be indoors with other vaccinated people and be indoors with unvaccinated people if they're not at risk in a particular high risk group or whatever. A couple days ago, they loosened restrictions about masks outdoors for vaccinated people, which I know there's some people listening to this right now going like, you weirdos are wearing masks outdoors?
Yeah.
And
Yes,
like
we
this,
are.
so yeah, we are. And this kind of comes, the reason I want to talk about this is I don't want to try and make anybody move their conscience where they're not comfortable with.
Right.
I don't want to put down anyone that feels differently about some of the things we're going to say today, because it may be hard to listen to. But I took a personal retreat weekend up to Tahoe, and the idea for this kind of came out of that, which was like, I stopped at a gas station in another California town.
Right.
And I'm looking around, and I'm like, I'm going in to get the bathroom key, and I'm thinking to myself, something's not right. You have like one of those Hitchcock moments where you're like,
Yeah. Like, am I in a movie or?
what is happening right now? And it just took me a good 30 seconds to realize I was the only person in that entire place wearing a mask. And this is just a neighboring California town.
Right.
Okay? The clerks were not wearing a mask. The people shopping there were not wearing a mask. People were walking around outdoors. Like, it was, I felt like Captain America just got pulled out of the ice, and I got woken up into like a different, I'm like, where am I?
That's right.
This
Yeah.
is, I've only been on the road for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm not like in some obscure village in,
right.
Uganda. What is
Yeah.
happening right now?
Yeah. Still in California.
And so it just kind of dawned on me, like, my county, our county,
Right.
is very far to one extreme, okay? And then I've got other friends that live in places like, Texas or Florida that are very far to another way of life.
Yeah.
And it's very kind of easy for us to be shaped by our own culture.
Yeah.
And then so what I kind of want to talk about is like, how do we wisely like re-enter, not being shaped by the culture, not being arbitrary, which is some stuff that we've all had to talk about and wrestle with and go through, and maybe sharing even some of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And how does a thinking Christian not allow themselves to be politicized in their re-entry efforts, not to be governed by fear in their re-entry efforts, and yet at the same time being wise and loving to their neighbor and to people around them? Like so just like, we're gonna like share a bunch of random thoughts as we try and navigate this topic. And so like, let me ask you a question to kind of get us started.
Yeah.
Has re-entry been smooth for you?
I would say that it has not been overall. I would say of late it has. So just for me personally, the vaccine was like, not the hope to end all hope, but it was definitely a very key component in my own personal, convictions and comfort, and not just my own, but people around me. And so I will say that once I was fully vaccinated, that really opened, that loosened up a lot for me and also for my household as well. And so
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second.
But before that, never mind, you go.
No, it's fine. We're going to come around to all of that. Okay, so here's one of the things that a conversation that I find myself having more lately. In fact, I had it just at lunch today. The point of the vaccination was, no matter where you land on vaccine, so if you decide you're going to get vaccinated, the point of that was never, this is going to prevent me from ever catching COVID.
Yep. Well,
which is how people, I think a lot of people still think.
Yeah.
Like, I think a lot of the problems of reentry for people right now is like, even with the vaccine, they're thinking to themselves, oh, but something could break through.
Yes.
But the point was never that every person in this country at some point is going to catch COVID. The question is to what degree and under what social circumstances and climate will you catch it? Will you catch it when there's an overwhelmed medical community?
Right.
Will you catch it in a mitigated way or in an unmitigated way? Those are the kinds of things that the vaccination is about. It's not about, this is going to stop me from getting COVID.
Right. Yeah. And I also think, for myself, and I think for many people my age who are young, relatively healthy, for me it's a lot less about my own health, but like the health of people around me. That would actually be worse for me. It would be, if I got laid out I would not be preferable, but my concern was a lot more for my parents and my wife's parents and other people in my community that I know and love, that like if I was to be a chain in that was like more of the concern than actually like, I think I'm gonna die from this thing. And so, and I mean, that's a really good reminder regarding the vaccine in and of itself. And I think there was more, despite what they were telling us, which was, hey, actually, as far as vaccines go, this one's pretty dang effective.
Because the flu vaccine's like 40%.
It's like 40%, which is crazy. I didn't even know that, you know. But the more people that, anyways, that's another thing. But there was so much hope attached to it, even in my own heart. But that still doesn't. There's always risk involved in anything that you do.
This was always about mitigation, not elimination.
And I think we, for those of us who are more conservative, not politically, but in terms of our approach to the virus, it was like, we're always thinking like, how can I eliminate risk? And then that's a really tricky way to think, because as you and I have talked about, you can't.
It's not a zero-sum game,
Right. I mean, you can, and that would be to live a mitigated life for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Which means not re-entering in any way, shape, or form. So that really, we just kind of talked in a circle back to our question, which is what does re-entry look like?
Yeah, because so So one of the articles that I just read was a Wall Street Journal article from a couple days ago, and the article was basically about families are now going to be having tough arguments about, especially when they're coming from different contexts, even within the same state. But definitely if you're coming from different states and different areas, rural or urban or whatever, and they're going to be having all kinds of different comfort level and fights, and that we knew. What we didn't know is how much re-entry anxiety people would have, even under the most safest and sanctioned conditions.
Right.
So I'm going to quote this thing. It says, "Re-entry anxiety around social interactions is understandable," says Cleveland clinical psychologist Susan Albers. "People have fallen out of practice with socializing and are now coming together with varying boundaries and safety concerns. Guidelines are changing often. We're still adjusting to figure out what feels safe and what feels okay, irrespective of what health officials are telling us." And that is the trick right now. And so like the metaphor we've been using is like, there's this muscle in our soul that has atrophied. And what I'm seeing with some people is like, they're going, I'm not going to go into that room with a bunch of vaccinated people, and I'm still going to wear my mask when I'm in my car by myself, even though I'm vaccinated, because there's this, they've now been conditioned to this weariness that the world is a threat. And like, how do we overcome that?
And I mean, it's interesting they use the word feels in that article, because that really is the two-edged sword, right? And that's the struggle we have as leaders is, there are some people in our congregation who, and this is the minority, I would say, who, even with the vaccine, and even they are still going to take more precautions because of their own personal health concerns, things like that. That's less really what we're talking about.
Exactly.
And what we're talking more about are the most people are generally healthy enough where, even with all of these things in place, there's still that feeling component where this doesn't feel safe.
We've been told the world is a threat for so long that it's now a conditioned response that's coming out of us, even when we're stepping into relatively safe, quote unquote, conditions.
And it's, that's a real challenge for us as leaders, because on one hand we don't want to push people into uncomfortable situations that are going against their conscience, which is the word used. On the other hand, it is really good for us to press into and why people feel the way that they feel. And in a lot of cases, and I think that the phrase that came to my mind as I thought about this for myself, and just to be transparent, me and my family sort of, but I kind of started the domino back in January. There was I was fine throughout the fall, and something changed right after Christmas time, and I was just really afraid. I heard stories of people I knew from school before whose parents got it and passed away, and it was like, man, I was making decisions, not thinking all the way through what those decisions would mean in the rest of my life. So I was arbitrarily saying, okay, this group over here isn't safe, and this group over here is, and it wasn't a consistent line of thought. And really the phrase that I kind of noticed in myself and also in other people is it's really important, I think, for a thinking Christian to think these things through and to understand why we feel the way we do, because otherwise we're just borrowing consciences from other people.
Borrowing consciences instead of making, instead of coming up with a rubric or a matrix that makes really good sense and applying it consistently across your life. The borrowing consciences thing, I think, is just normative right now for most people. And there's it's a little subtle, because it's different from learning from someone and gathering information. Okay, here's a perspective of someone who's more, comfortable
so I can learn from them. Here's the perspective of someone who's more, locked down and conservative. I can learn from them.
Yeah.
And then, but then the hard thing becomes, let me take that and pray and consider and weigh the risk and do the work of figuring that out for me and my family.
Yeah.
That's different than, this is what all these people are doing over here. I'm just going to take that and apply it.
And assimilate it into my thinking as normative or as the gold standard.
Which worked back when we were all locked down.
It did, yeah.
But it doesn't work when we re-enter, because then when you start being introduced to different scenarios and different combinations of people, we freeze.
Yeah.
Because we haven't thought through the nuances of those decisions.
Yeah. One of the we kind of like introduced these 6 layers of mitigation here at Anthem, and the point of that was to say, like, listen, like, we're getting stuck because we've been so used to binary leadership, which is, in other words, safe, not safe, on or off.
Right.
But as thinking Christians, I think what you can do is you can look out at all the information, not just the Marin County information, or if you live in Kentucky, not just the Kentucky information. You can look at all the information and make more nuanced, better decisions about socializing based on the information that you have available to us. So, for example, someone in LA, back in the fall, it probably wasn't wise for them to be, hanging out with X group of people, okay? But for somebody in rural wherever where there's no cases, that's a different layer of mitigation that is present just by your zip code.
Right.
Your zip code is a layer of mitigation. Your behavior is a layer of mitigation. Right. Whether you get tested is a layer of mitigation. And now that we have this thing that we were all told was the end goal, which at least here in Marin County, where you have such high vaccine adherence, the goalpost is moving internally for people, but they don't know where. Because that's the question I find myself asking people a lot is, what is your end goal? Well, variance. Okay, well, variance is not a problem right now. That's a problem for another time. So let's punt that down the road and have the variant conversation if and when that becomes reality.
More prevalent,
But right now, where's the goal line? Because if the goal is no risk of catching COVID, then you might as well stay home.
And I think for some people, that's their decision. And that's where the pastoral work is required. And
not to violate their conscience,
Right.
but to press into
Right.
how and why we're making these decisions.
And that's really it. I mean, that's our goal, right? Is to help people understand why they're making the decisions they're making, instead of it just being fear-based. So I don't know. It's,
because a lot of us we're doing things that we're used to, but we're not thinking through whether those things are, like, I get it. When we go out to a restaurant, we kind of have to obey and adhere to the letter of the law if we want to eat there. Okay. So I get that. But we have all these other contexts where we have the freedom to make more nuanced decisions than what's happening out there. And what we're doing is we're taking what we're seeing out there and we're trying to bring them in here, even if we know that those are arbitrary and not actually good science. Like, for example, if I go to a restaurant and they want me to, if wearing your mask from the door to the table and then take it off at the table is arbitrary in any indoor setting.
Definitely.
Okay. But we're used to that's how we stay safe, by doing things like that.
I
don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does, and it's tricky because it's like there's part of it, especially here in California, where we're just like, okay, I'm used to this, like, But I also know that, me walking from the door of a restaurant to a table with a mask on and then having it off for an hour and a half, like, that little thing didn't do anything.
It did not.
But it's also like, okay, like if that's
I deal with it. If I want to eat there, I deal with it. And
right.
But then you come to the church, and then somebody will say, are we going, they might say, okay, if and when we go back, because we're still outdoors under the tent, but if and when we go back to indoors, are we going to shorten the time of the gathering, or are we going to, how are we going to space people out? What's that all going to look like?
Yeah.
Well, the reality is once you decide to go back indoors, once you're in the room for longer than 20 minutes, all mitigation is futile.
Right.
Unless everyone in the room is wearing an N95 mask, all mitigation is futile. In our case, the best mitigation that we have available to us is that, like, our whole church is, has
almost everyone's vaccinated.
Yeah,
Totally.
But and it's like, why does that feel like it would be helpful to you, even though we know the science over here says something different? And there's just a lot of that we're going to have to overcome when we do reentry.
Yeah, and I've thought about this because, and I want to be careful how I say this, but usually when I say this, it means it's fine, and it's just me.
I'm the one who upsets people. You can't upset anybody.
I thought about this a lot, and this happened a lot during the holidays, and it would be like families starting, to gather, which in certain contexts may have been ill-advised, and in other contexts were probably fine, But you hear the story of, and it still happens now, it's like they were naughty and they did this thing and someone got COVID. And we are always in all of our venues telling people, hey, like, be wise, you take precautions, and there were certainly stories of people who were being, maybe reckless, but at the same time, we didn't hear about all the families who were careful and who, and it worked out for them.
Yeah.
And that was probably way more than the other side of things.
Yeah, clearly it was. I mean, like, one of the things that I think is just now dawning on me is, like, there have been churches all over the country, and whether you agree with this or not is not the point, all across the country that have been meeting indoors unmitigated this whole time. Yep. And it's not like we're hearing about a super spreader church event every other day in the news. Right. We hear about the one and we go, this is why we shouldn't do it.
Right.
And yet this has been happening, for a long time all across the country. In fact, even here in Marin County, I mean, we're one of the only churches not indoors right now. Which is, wild because.
But also gives us a little bit of credibility to talk about.
I think so, because we've been because of our context. Again, no matter how you feel about it, because of our context, we made leadership decisions that would allow us to be good missionaries and citizens here. Right. And I do think that gives us credibility to now start having this conversation, because we have been on the more conservative side of our approaches to this stuff. Yeah,
definitely. So anyway, I say that, like, not as like like these people got away with it and it's okay, and it diminishes all the people who actually. But I just think about how that kind of news, especially for a personality like mine that's, like, always looking for the risk factor, and like that's not a good way to, like, think about how things work. So yes, be careful, yes, be wise, but we here in California have so much, especially in Marin, have so much mitigation in place already that we have to take into account, that we can't just be like, thinking of the 0.00 whatever percent. That's what I'm trying to say.
We're always trying to get.
I guess that's what I'm trying to get at, is, like, it's easy to live your life as that's like a 50-50 chance. And it might be if you were doing something stupid. Yeah. But most of us aren't. Most of us are living mitigated lives. So we have to take all that into consideration as we make our decisions about things. Anyways.
Yeah, I'm sure right now there's somebody in Tennessee listening to this going, these people are crazy.
I'm sure. Yes.
And I don't bring that up, like, to say, like, hey, Marin County, jump on the unmitigation train. That's not what.
No.
I'm trying to provide context that there are people all over the country where it's very different than it is here right now, and we need to take that information, like you were saying earlier, and add it to our thinking.
Yeah.
Because when you're just here, and you're just looking at numbers here, and you're just following the news here, and you're just living here, it gets so easy for us to think that this is like the gold standard for, for life. The only way to stay safe is the way we do it here.
Yeah. And look at India right now. It's like, I think that we have to.
Or even a better case, if you remember, California nobody was more locked down than our state, and then we had that huge surge afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's like we were all patting ourselves on the back for a while. Yeah. And then we had that huge surge.
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, man, it's very easy for us to be thinking in terms of right and wrong with this stuff, and like maybe a better way to say it is like holy and unholy, or like stupid or not stupid. And binary. Yeah. And there's so much that goes into, the surge that's happening in India is probably happening for different reasons than the surge that happened in California as well. And there were different factors at play, different socio-economical factors at play, different.
Yeah. And they can't seem to get the vaccine rolled out very well.
Yeah. And in California, some argued that because we were so locked down, it was like there was this pressure release valve that caused everyone to just go. And so there's just so much at play in this. And I think as Christians, it's important to remember that and not get swept up in the binary.
It's like this article that you sent me, which is entitled, "Even After Being Fully Vaccinated, Many Still Wrestle with a Fear of Catching COVID." And then like the subheading is a quote from somebody. And it says, "I don't want to be sitting in a movie theater with patient 0 of a variant that bucks the vaccine.
Yeah.
Well, two things about that. One, that's a problem for another time for us here in Marin County. It's not a problem today.
Right.
And two, at least as of right now, the number of people that have been killed who were vaccinated by COVID, the article is quick to point out, is 0.00001%.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, there's a 1. We're trying to get everything to 0.
Yeah.
And that world is not possible.
Yeah. And that's what personalities like mine need to keep in mind, is that there's always a risk in everything that you do.
Yeah, we've now hit the stage, at least here, where, you've heard me say this enough, but not the people listening.
Right.
We've now hit the stage where you're more likely to die in the car coming to church than getting COVID at church. You're more likely to get killed by a swarm of bees walking to church than catching COVID at church. We're now, at least as of today, we're now in that kind of, we're talking about that many zeros in the odds numbers now. And so what I think we should be encouraging our people to do is ask the question, like, is there an atrophied muscle inside of me?
Yeah.
If I'm still hesitant to engage with the world around me in very highly mitigated circumstances, though they will not be zero risk circumstances, is that a really about COVID, or is that really about this atrophied muscle? And what are the consequences of not stretching that muscle?
Yeah, and we've talked about that in other podcasts as well. So yes, if you stay at home and if you don't engage with people, then you're going to probably not get COVID. But you have to think, I think we're at the point now where we have to think more holistically about our lives and our mental and spiritual health, and what are we missing out on by just trying to avoid this one big risk in our life, or big, in quotes, I should say. And that's really helped me as a more COVID conservative, I'll say, type person, is it's like I can live my life in a way where I can go to bed at night and say, all right, there's no way I caught COVID today. But to do that, that's a really expensive way to live.
It is a very costly way to live.
Yeah, in terms of all the other things you're sacrificing to get there. And so,
physical health from mental health, relational health, emotional health, all the
and
all the things that end in AL.
That's right. That have to do with yourself. And a year ago, it was different. But we've had a year of not being used to saying, okay, now things are moving forward.
Yeah.
And now what? And
we're not saying, I'm not even saying, and even though I know some other people will say, no, that is what you should be saying. But what I'm saying is like, I'm not saying go out and do a bunch of unmitigated things, with a bunch of people who you don't know. I would argue, for example, if you're a member of our church, I would argue one of the safest things that you can do right now is come to our church indoors unmitigated if we were to choose to do that.
Yeah.
But yet you're probably okay, and you don't know why, sitting unmasked in a restaurant more than you are doing that.
Yep.
Or going to Safeway with a bunch of households that you don't know. You're probably more okay with that, but you don't know why.
Yeah.
And that's the arbitrary stuff, the borrowing of consciences stuff that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. I remember in college I saw not a Christian, but a therapist for a while, because I was dealing with some of my own anxiety type stuff. And this actually reminds me a lot of like struggling with certain types of like OCD type tendencies and stuff, because it's like I have to do this thing in order to feel comfortable. And then for me it was like washing your hands, and this was before COVID, ironically. But it's like what this person helped me realize is it's like, why are you doing that thing? And it's like, well, here's why. And like getting to the end of that fear and diminishing that fear through examination of what was actually so scary about like not washing my hands. And the prescription of it was like, I want you to go a whole day only doing that once or twice. And it was this like, it sounds scarier than it is, but they called it exposure therapy. And I thought about that a lot with like this type of stuff, and it connects to our muscle metaphor of like, and I think the article actually alluded to this as well, which is like, hey, maybe you can't do this big thing yet. And I think that's, again, binary thinking. That's what everyone's like, well, okay, so what you're asking me to do is like go...
Is do everything.
Do everything.
Yeah.
Like go
it's
sit
like all
and
or nothing syndrome.
Yeah. And it's like, no.
Take a small step.
But it would probably be good to go and do something a little more out there.
For your comfort zone.
For your comfort zone.
To begin to make baby steps towards what is probably generally safe.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, exactly. So
low risk, not no risk.
Right. Right. And taking that's what I would tell someone if they called me and were like, hey, I'm really struggling with this, but I want to get back to real life, to regular life, or life as we know it.
Yeah.
I would just encourage them with like those small like steps towards normalcy, I think are really important to take.
And for like us as like, believers, what is inescapable for us is that we believe something that calls us out into the world.
Right.
And we have to own that at some point, and we're going to have to face that. Oh, but this is extenuating circumstances. Listen, this is going to make you angry, but the Bible doesn't let you off the hook for those extenuating circumstances, at least not in a protracted way.
Yeah.
I can, you're probably not going to preach the gospel to the guy who's robbing you at gunpoint. That's an extenuating circumstance. I get it.
Right.
But if the two of you got locked up in a cell together because you shot him with your gun,
right.
at some point you got to preach the gospel
Yeah.
to that guy.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting when you think about it that way. And I actually think that what a lot of people are missing maybe isn't even like socialization, but it's like engagement in things that matter, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so maybe that's a more compelling reason to face our fears than just like, I want to go hang out with some people.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you are created for more than just like, you know.
Risk management.
Right.
Yeah.
And you were created for wisdom, but you were not given a spirit of timidity. As Paul writes. So.
And a lot of people say, well, we want to be wise. And I was like, yes, but wisdom is wisdom because it's under the presumption that you're going to be walking in a dangerous world.
Yeah.
That's what makes it wisdom.
Right.
Wisdom is not, otherwise then it's not wisdom if you're not walking in a world that is hostile.
Yeah.
So, so I don't know, man. I think I don't remember how long ago I said it, but I said the hardest part is about to happen. It's going to be reentry.
Yep.
Leading through COVID's not the hardest part.
No.
Leading through, all the protests that happened last year was not the hard part. Leading through the social anxiety of the new normal was not the hardest part. Reentry, in its varying phases and challenges, that is by far going to be the hardest part.
Yeah.
Because some of us are going to go, oh, they're starting to do stuff. I don't think that's wise. Because we don't think it's wise for us, which is a different conversation for ourselves.
Yep.
And we're going to lay that at their feet because we're also going to be struggling with the fact that we're getting left behind.
Right. And that's what I think a lot of people don't. It's easier to make decisions for a family, but when you have something like a church, I mean, there's, we probably have people who for months now have been like,
come on,
when
guys.
are they gonna?
Yeah, come
seriously.
on, guys.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, we have people who are like, hey, it's way too early.
Hey, I'm feeling left behind, and it's so our challenge here in Marin has been, how do we take all that and how do we shepherd people?
I like what this guy wrote, or this person wrote at the end of this article a lot, because it's actually a Christian ethic, which is psychologists urge everyone to have patience, both with themselves and with others, as all of us adjust to the idea that being fully vaccinated means we can begin to resume some of the activities that we had to abruptly abandon last year in March when the pandemic hit.
Right.
Not every person is going to be ready at the same time in the same ways.
Yeah.
And so consider others more important than yourself.
Yeah.
And have patience with your brother and sister, and just maybe we can get through this hardest part together.
Yeah, we have no hope of getting through it without a ton of humility, to consider, to help one another and confront fear together, but also to like have patience with each other, because even that good process will take longer for different people.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and it was easier to manage all the different consciences when public authorities were saying, here's what's allowed and here's what isn't. It didn't matter where your conscience was. We were all kind of bound by certain things collectively.
The work was done for us.
Yeah, it was done for. Re-entry will be altogether different, because now those different consciences will have freedom to live in different ways and to do different things.
Right.
And we have to figure out a way to thread the needle as a community where we can bring as many consciences together as possible, while recognizing we're not going to be able to bring them all together.
And I feel kind of provoked to say, like, I think it's really easy, and I catch myself doing this all the time, where it's like, we have, this whole past year, we've all been living primarily in our homes with either alone or with families or whoever we're living with. And I think our eyes, because we've been doing that, have been fixed on that world. And it's been how do I get myself and the people around me to the finish line that we feel comfortable with for life to start again?
Yeah.
And I think that as members of a church and as Christians, we can't do just that. Like, we really have to, yes, tend to your home and your family, but we have to look around at each other too. You know, it's not a win if just you cross the finish line and you leave all your brothers and sisters behind you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can, if you see that they can take some steps forward, you can like encourage them in that. If they're stuck back here, I think we need to bear with people who are, and that doesn't mean you and your family can't take those steps forward, but people are going to be isolated and alone if we're just focused on our own unit and getting our own unit across the finish line. So,
yeah, that's well said. And then the other thing is, the other thing I've been thinking about recently is there was a time, and it's been mostly for the last year, to leave people to their consciences. I think there's also a time to begin to not ask people to override their consciences, but to explain them.
Right.
In other words, to press into them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the time for church leaders now, which is to ask people like, okay, we don't want to be arbitrary. We want to be thinkers, because I think that's what the gospel compels us to.
Right.
So now is the time where we can start to, encourage them like, hey, I see you're still afraid of this thing. Let's talk about why. And have a loving conversation about it, not one where you're like, hey, what the heck's wrong with you? Why are you so, you're being dumb.
Yeah.
You
Well, and to your point, I mean, unfortunately, the way this year has gone, if you bring up masks, automatically your conversation is a confrontation. If you bring up vaccines, automatically your conversation is a confrontation. And
if you bring up social distancing,
and
whatever,
what's missing, and which you will not find in the conversation at large, is a discussion about, like, hey, explain your fears. Like, let me sit with you in this and sort it out with you. And then maybe by doing that, I mean, you've done that with me and you've helped me tremendously in the past few months, but it took someone patiently helping for me to see some things. And that's what some people need. But there's no nuanced approach to it anywhere.
No.
So people are
binary. It's all binary thinking.
People are forced to pick one or the other.
Yeah. Our politics is binary, Republican or Democrat, which is why all of this COVID stuff has been so binary. You're either a masker or you're not.
Right.
You're either a vaxxer or you're not.
Right.
You either live mitigated or you don't. It just, and it depends on what county you're in, what state you're in, what context you're in. And, and unfortunately, so much of it has become so arbitrary that we can't sort out what's really, truly good and helpful, which you would think a virus would have brought us together to be able to do that. Right. And it didn't. It made it worse.
No, somehow.
But that's what we've always said about, we've always said in the church that pain does not produce character. It reveals it. Right. So in other words, who you are is going to be revealed when we turn the temperature up. Well, we just saw the character of our nation for the last year. Yeah. Big time. And we had been sowing into it. Right. So
yeah, it's a lot of, reaping what we've sown, I think.
So we as individual churches and individual communities, we have an opportunity to be better than the world around us. And to learn from all of the information from all of the places and make better decisions than we are capable of in our binary settings. So
agreed.
I think we can leave it there. We will hopefully see you guys next week.
Plan on it.
Barring a riot outside the church because of this podcast.
Yep.